Hello, I am Sophie Hooper, Head of Policy and Research at IWFM. Welcome to today's webinar where we will be discussing maximising workplace productivity in a post-COVID-19 world. A few weeks ago, you may have noticed an item in the news, it was only a little one, announcing the fact that the World Health Organization had declared that the COVID global health emergency was over. Fairly small the announcement was, but a vitally important one for the world, the economy, and of course, our profession and sector. As organizations look to a future without COVID, they can freely decide how they want to arrange their people, places, and processes to maximize productivity going forward. And we will be exploring that trinity of people, place, and process a little bit more closely throughout this discussion, of course. Last week, we also saw the publication of Gallup's workforce survey, which looks at people's relationship with work. And I have picked up from some commentators that the summary is quite brutal. Work is ruining the lives of millions of people. 19% of Brits say they feel anger for a lot of the day, and 38% say their experience is stress. We've obviously got our own experts here today, who I think may have a few reflections of their own to add in this particular area. Today's webinar is in collaboration with Accruent and, of course, us. And as already was alluded to, it will consider the key dimensions of the productivity challenge and provide for practical suggestions for organizations wanting to get their productivity scoring. So to discuss this large and exciting topic, we've assembled some fantastic thinkers. Thank you all for your time and your insights that you will bring to the table today. It better be good. In terms of the run of the show, I'll be initially leading a discussion into the key dimensions and considerations around this topic. And we will then want to open up the discussion for questions and answers from you, the audience. And I would really like to encourage you to pop your questions throughout the session, and please post them in the Q&A box, not the chat function. And you can do this anonymously if you so desire. Before we close the webinar at the other end, around 1 o'clock, we will also ask a poll question that will determine the topic of the next episode in our collaboration with Accruent. And in addition, throughout July, we will also be asking some LinkedIn questions. So please keep an eye out for them so we can keep the conversation going. Right. First, then, I would like to invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Rebecca, may I please start with you?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Finney. I am Director of Customer Success at Accruent. I can't say it, so that's not a good start. I look after the international team, so basically anything that isn't American-based, so all of the accounts roll up into my team. I've worked in FM as some form or another as a client consultant for the last 25 years, doing data analysis, cost management, various other things. So that's me. Hello.
Thank you very much. Dan, can I please bring you in?
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. My name is Dan Hughes from Alpha Property Insight, which is a consultancy which helps the built environment and property companies with data and technology and how that's changing over time. At the moment, there's a particular focus on some of the downsides and the risks that need to be avoided from the adoption of data and technology. I'm also involved with something called the Real Estate Data Foundation, which is got two main aims. It's a not-for-profit that's bringing the sector together. I'm delighted that IWFM is part of that supporting network. And it's about bringing the sector together around data and crucially making sure that data ethics is going up the agenda, which I think is something that we'll probably touch on a little bit later on.
Thank you very much. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Moriarty. Sometimes I'm the co-host of the Workplace Geeks podcast. So that's a podcast that looks at sort of deep dives into workplace academia. So talking to researchers and lecturers and much cleverer people than me about the world of workplace and what they're finding in their very scientific studies. And other times I am the co-founder of a software platform called Audium, which is a employee feedback platform, analytics platform, specializes in free text and looks at holistic workplace experience. So not just space, but looks at sort of people, tech and business outcome stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Hannah Wilson.
Hi, thank you. I'm really looking forward to today. My name's Hannah Wilson and I'm Senior Lecturer in Research Methods in Business, and I lead our DBA programme at Liverpool Business School. So that's kind of like my day job, teaching doctoral education. In fact, that's what I'm doing this week. And my other hat is a researcher, specifically around workplace and kind of people development. So my background's in organisational psychology, and I look at kind of the intersection between that and the built environment and making places better for people.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much, and we may as well get started with our discussion. So our structured discussion will touch on a variety of areas. First, we'll start looking at some considerations around the end of the pandemic and really the impact of the changed work places and built environment. Then we'll be looking at key drivers of productivity. We'll also look at the return on workplace investment tool. And lastly, we will be exploring really the role of technology, or should I say rather data. So to open that question really around the considerations and the impact of the end of the pandemic on the workplace and where we are, what does this confirmed freedom really mean for organizations? And that's really a question for everyone that I'd like to be tackled. Who would like to go first? Chris.
Well, no, Rebecca looked like she was going to go first. So come on, Rebecca, you go first.
I was just going. Thank you. I was just going to say flexibility, isn't it? That's the key thing that everyone's got out of this. I mean, I've personally worked remotely for 8 years, and a lot of my friends used to say, "I don't know how you can do it. It's weird. Don't you miss an office space?" And now, having been forced to do it due to COVID, they're like, actually, it's amazing because you set up your proper office area. You're not just sat with a laptop on your knee, and it's opened up, I think, opportunities and flexibility for a lot more people that previously they were a bit closed-minded to remote flexible working.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I was going to come at a slightly different angle there as well, because I agree with you, right? There's a cohort of people that have always worked remotely, and everyone else is something cottoned on to, oh, actually, this isn't too bad. I mean, unless you've got, like I have today, 2 young kids downstairs battling for attention, in which case it's horrific. But I was actually going to challenge your question, Sophie, because I'm not sure I have seen genuine freedom in how organizations are approaching this, right? Because my general sense is leadership are terrified of this whole thing. They're terrified because before it all happened, they were of the opinion, right, you can't work from home unless you're a certain management level, or your role, like, in your case, Rebecca, it might have been like a regional sales role or something like that, right? Where they go, oh, that makes sense to me because they get, if they're in the office, they're not selling or something like that. So there were certain roles and certain levels that got this freedom, but it never got into the wider thing. Now it has, and now you've got, to Rebecca's point, a whole group of people going, hey, this working from home stuff is really cool, and they're going, oh, we're not prepared for this, and they're fumbling around trying desperately to try and find a pattern that keeps everyone happy and keeps them happy, to sort of reassure themselves. And actually what we end up with is this: you can work wherever you want as long as on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday you're in this office 9 till 5. And that it kind of undermines itself in that it's like, it's freedom, but it's not freedom. It feels like freedom, but it genuinely isn't freedom. So I think there's a long way for us to go yet before organizations have actually given that freedom. And I think that's almost the sticking point to a lot of the issues that I'm sure we're going to get into today is actually this mental block, I think, that we've got around some management practices.
Yeah, I was going to kind of come in and echo pretty much what Chris has said. My thought is we have opportunities for new ways of working. People have recognized, that we might be able to do something a little bit differently. But I don't think, as Chris said, that I don't think we're quite there yet, because we haven't got buy-in from, those decision makers. We've still got this culture of kind of presenteeism. And I think it's opened up ways of seeing how we can do work differently, but that doesn't mean that we've fully followed with actually facilitating that.
Brilliant. Dan? Do you have?
I'm going to pretty much echo everything that's been said. I agree with all of it. I think actually, interestingly, the business process and the culture is much bigger problem than pretty much the buildings or the technology. And until that gets resolved, then it's going to be very difficult to move forward. I think it's also worth just saying, reflecting and building it back to the building side of things, is whether it is true flexibility or whether you're just working in a rigid way from different places. We will find that people do different tasks in different situations in different places. And so I think for offices in particular, there is a massive challenge of banks and banks and banks of desks that people are not going to want to come in on the Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday and just sit they're doing what they could do from home. And I think that whether that is true flexibility or whether that's sort of pseudo flexibility, I think that the role of the office and that place is going to change, because now you work from everywhere. So the workplace is really wherever you are rather than a building that you go to.
Thank you all for that. That discussion started off much more vigorously than I anticipated. I was going to round this question up with, well, are we seeing perhaps more of a burden on organizations? We started talking very much about, well, what the limitations are. Can we explore those a little bit more? Because I've heard fear of employers, I've heard culture is actually much more of a bigger issue. So where does that leave both employers and employees? If we can take it along that axis, can we explore the limitations a little bit more?
Where does it leave employees? I think someone's stuck somewhere in the middle is the reality of it, right? Because it goes back to market. Things tend to be driven by market forces, right? That if I guarantee you, well, maybe not all of them, but there'll be a large chunk of organizations, if you ask them honestly, what would you prefer? They're like, we just want to go back to how it was. We just want to get Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, because that was easy, because we didn't have to think about this stuff, because people just did it and we could think about other stuff instead. But I feel like there's this kind of pressure to do something, because there are another group of organizations who are totally flexible, genuinely totally flexible, and therefore from a jobs and talent point of view, you've got to be seen to be doing something. But this, we there's always a danger with this topic, that we talk about stuff that we've been talking about since the pandemic, right? This is the same issue. I think what we're finding now is, as we come out of, like the WHO announcing that it's over, from their point of view, from a very specific point of view, what that really means is that some of the stuff we talked about during the pandemic, like hygiene becoming massive and air quality being huge and all this sort of stuff, and I'm not sure yet what the residual impact of those kind of like microscopic focus on those bits are. I don't know what, some people in the industry might change, say that we're asked about it all the time. It's become much more thing, it's gone up in the contracts. Don't know. I haven't got the experience for that. But when we are talking about this, it always reminds me of when in a commercial environment, I used to say the recession always highlights things you're doing badly, because money was a constant. And when money's a constant in the good times, you don't have to innovate. You don't have to be particularly sparkly to succeed, right? Because there's just money swirling around. But suddenly when everyone starts pulling the money back, they don't stop spending generally, they just stop spending frivolously. And you start to really see the organizations that were nailing it and the ones that perhaps weren't. And it feels like to me what the pandemic has done is that same effect, but on organizations and how they treat their employees, right? It's kind of highlighted the ones that maybe weren't doing such a cracking job, but we just kind of went along with it, and the ones that are. And the reason I say that is this whole hybrid, remote working, all the rest of it, we're talking about it like it's sort of a new phenomenon, right? People worked remotely before, but at this scale, it's kind of new. But the reality is, on the podcast, we had a guy called Jack Nillis, right? And I think he's nearly 90 now, right? He was a former NASA scientist and all the rest of it. In 1975, he wrote a book about telecommuting, right? He wrote a book showing organizations in 1975, this whole commuting thing doesn't make any sense. We could build, and at the time it wasn't home, but it was like satellite centers in suburban areas. Why don't people just go and work somewhere that they can walk to? Something like a co-working space, before co-working was a thing. Why can't they just go there and we can send them the data and the knowledge and the information they need, and they can work from there? So we were talking to them and say, look, you've been banging this drum for 40 years. The pandemic has suddenly really kind of invigorated it. What stopped businesses doing this? And one word answer: culture. He says the management can't get their head around it. So until we start addressing management, and probably, and I'm sure other panelists have a view on this, right? Until we start looking at management science, the science of management, and understanding it, how many managers are out there with very little training, with very little scientific training? We are talking about complicated things and then just throwing these situations at them and go, improvise, and they're struggling. And until we address some of those things, we'll always have this sort of conversation, because employees, work context, social environments, they change. And when they change, you've got to think scientifically to see about what will work. If we adjust, how do we go forward? Sorry, bit of a soapbox, but that for me feels like there's surface level stuff, but there's real core stuff that we need to address as well.
Absolutely. I saw some people nodding. So I think, Hannah, I'm going to bring you into this discussion, because I think one of the shifts that we would definitely hope is residual, as Chris put it, is that shift that actually hybrid is not really about hybrid as such. It's about implementing workplace strategy, and there is no one-size-fits-all model around that. It's really about looking at the needs of the organization and their employees. And then before giving way to you, I also want to note, Rebecca, I'm going to line you up to look at what is best practice in bringing some of those people, how to manage that resistance of workforce to come back into the office. So, Hannah.
Yeah, I was kind of building on what Chris said, but kind of reflecting that is that I think it's thinking about employees as well and what they need. Obviously, going through the pandemic, we've all experienced working from home, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows how to do it. We still have this way of seeing what work is and how we do work, and that's still persistent. That's going to be very hard to change, because that's been built up over years and years. We still have these very traditional ideas of what work is. So if we're asking, even if as an individual we're asking to do work differently, it's still the expectation that we know how to do work differently, and that everybody wants to do work differently. And I just don't think that's true. People, yes, there's certain individuals who've done teleworking for years and years, but not everybody can and wants to do that. So if we look at, you said today you've got things going on in the house, and that will not be, everybody will have that sometimes, like at points, or even all the time, that they have other people, especially like younger millennials who are, maybe living with others all the time, who are also working from home. They might want to escape from that at home and work in offices, and also for people with neurodivergence as well. Divergencies, they might want to work in different places. And I think we need to have this understanding of everybody's needs, which obviously it's going to be complex, and organizations are always going to fixate on the individuals who maybe meet their own perceptions of what hybrid working is, that maybe confirm that it doesn't work because they're still uncomfortable with how to deliver hybrid working. So there's still that focus on, well, it doesn't work because these people are saying it doesn't. It's just that it might not for some people, but it does for others. And we need to understand how to meet everybody.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, so touching on what Hannah said, I think from the management point of view, is it, why do you want people in the office? What, it's understanding why for me. So is it about collaboration, or is it about control? Is it about trust? What are the reasons? Do you need people in the office every day? Is it a want? And then, is it understanding what do the employees want? Back to Hannah's point, do they want to come into the office sometimes, or do they not? And then it's understanding then what kind of workplace you need and what systems and management you need to put in place in order to satisfy, everyone's kind of requirements, because some people would never want to work 100% remotely. Some people would never want to work 100% in an office again, and it's a difficult balance, because there's so many considerations you need to take into account that I don't think it will ever be perfect for everybody. But I think understanding that want and that need is a key to getting somewhere.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And has already been alluded to, this isn't necessarily new. Part of the reason, I guess, why we wanted to talk about this once again is because a lot of the voices around this just seem to be absolutely losing sight of that particular purpose, why people should be brought back to the office. And I think it's really important to start reinforcing that message right again. And I think it is going back to not just understanding that the culture and the purpose of office visits or any other space that might be within the control of the organization, but it's also reverting back to treating adults as adults, I guess, which is pure culture. Now, we talked a little bit about the different needs of different people, and also understanding really how we can make sure that people know how to work in different ways, whether that is virtual or not. How do you go about managing and maximizing productivity across distributed teams, really? Rebecca, I know that this is one of your areas.
Yeah, so technology, isn't it? You can't manage people remotely without investing in technology. I was talking to a client only this week, and they said luckily they had invested in new laptops for all of their employees just before COVID, which had Skype and Zoom installed on it, which meant that they could work remotely during COVID. If they hadn't have done that investment, that company would have imploded during COVID. They had no way to remotely look after their talent, and it's about understanding that sort of thing. And time zones, I mean, in my team there's 2 different time zones in just the people that work in my team, but I also work for an American company, so there's like 1 hour that overlaps between everybody in a day. So it's about planning key things to kind of make sure that if it's important that it's on there, recording it. We've got clients that are in Australia, so sometimes we have to get up at 6 a.m. to have a meeting with them, or we have to have meetings at 10 o'clock at night. It's understanding that flexibility and not expecting someone to be sat at their desk 9 to 5 as well, because you need that flexibility in order to work remotely, hybridly, however you want to do it, because everyone is working to that way. You are liaising with people, not just sat around the corner working 9 to 5. It's the flexibility that everyone needs. You can take an hour off in the middle of the day because you're going to be working an hour later at night, and it's that understanding, and as you said, treating people like adults.
That still requires, enabling that virtual connectivity and flexibility requires people on either side of the day, if that falls quite a lot of residual energy. People have got limited amount of energy.
Yeah.
What areas have possibly received insufficient attention to really get that right? Because how do you tap in that residual energy? It's got to be more than technology.
And I think it is that flexibility though, isn't it? And it's about the understanding. I mean, most people have days where they might have to do an 18-hour day if they've got to travel to a client meeting, have the meeting, travel back, and it's not that someone's working at 10 o'clock every night and up at 6 o'clock every morning. It's people manage their own diaries, people can decide what they're doing, and it's understanding that it's you get what you give and you give what you get kind of thing. I wouldn't expect someone, if they said to me they're on a meeting at 10 o'clock and I was trying to ring them at 8 in the morning and they're not answering, it's that understanding, isn't it, that people are flexible, and it's contact me when you're ready kind of thing, and I'll be here.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hannah, I'd like to bring you in, and you've come off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think absolutely what Rebecca said, but building upon that, I think it's really important to create communities as well. So I'm really interested in this idea of sense of community and how that can really bring people together. So yes, technology might bring people practically able to work together in teams, but that doesn't mean that they're going to work well together, or that they're, you know, thinking about maximizing productivity, that, you know, that's going to maximize their productivity. I think, as well as focusing on, you know, giving them flexibility and like treating them as adults, there's also this, how can we make them feel connected to the organization and therefore connected to each other, to be able to work well as a team? Because there's one thing, you know, being able to work as a team, but there's then being able to work well as a team together. And things that you can do is develop emotional connection between individuals, you know, by having that shared history, that shared experience, things like membership. So even kind of if you're looking in these virtual environments, how can they have like there's this idea of common symbols. So for example, if I'm in a meeting or in my virtual environments, I want to see that I'm part of Liverpool John Moores University. I want to see that I'm connected. And then I also want to see that I'm part of my DBA team. And like, how do I visually see that? And how do I kind of virtually see that, that I am connected? So I think looking at creating communities can kind of deepen those connections, enhance relationship quality, and therefore enhance teams' ability to work well together when they do come together.
Thank you, Hannah. Chris, I want to bring you back in because you've been a long time advocate of workplace, and I just want to you know, get your sense about how this evolution, not revolution, but evolution fits into the long-term narrative of the shift of FM to workplace.
Well, I think I think all this is doing is highlighting stuff that we haven't done before, right? And we've gotten away with it. So I think we're talking about productivity. So a P word, difficult one, and you could do a whole webinar on the P word and what it means, right? So let's just use it as a proxy for getting stuff done, and whether that's the right stuff or the wrong stuff might be here nor there, but it's getting stuff done. How do we work better in a post-pandemic? Well, it's the same as we did pre-pandemic. It's just things have changed a little bit, right? And that's understanding what people need to do and the best way to do it and how we support that is, it's, you know, the brass tacks of it all. Now, my training was in marketing, right? And Sophie, you and I have done lots of work together, so you'll be bored to tears with me, and anyone else has heard me talk will bored to tears about me comparing marketing approaches and practices to workplace. I think there's so much crossover, right? But let's put it this way: companies that, let's take someone like Woolworths or these companies, these lovely big brand stories where, you know, organization that was massive in a certain period then went kaput. Really, when you skim under the surface of it, you find out that when things start to go badly for them is when they continue to do the same thing they've always done and were ignorant to the environment that changed around them, right? They didn't adapt. They didn't look at, you know, if it's a high street business, it might be that they got blindsided by online shopping and didn't respond to it quick enough, and then we're playing catch up and all this sort of thing, right? And I kind of think about that with workplace professionals, because I kind of feel like this tension that we've got at the minute about return to office, which is by far my least favorite thing to hear at the minute, is when people talk about return to office strategies, right? It kind of feels like you've already made your mind up in the title, right? Rather than like, what is our workplace strategy? That would be nice. But what it feels to me like is the marketing equivalent of a organization forcing you to buy the product they've always had, right? And not going, oh, that's interesting. Consumer behavior has changed, buying behavior has changed, the context has changed. How do we adapt to that, still meet our objectives and goals? And how do we adapt to that to support our customers? So what workplace professionals should be looking at now is to say, okay, we never used to think about people working, you know, a big vast majority of the population not working here. What does here look like? What does there look like? How do these two things now complement each other? This is an extra dimension to something that we didn't have before, because when we look at the data that we collect from our clients, you know, this, and hybrid's the second most talked about thing, right? What you find is people are going, okay, look, I'm being dragged back into the office, and they talk about being dragged back into the office. I'm being forced to do the commute again, right? So those two things are heavy sacrifices to people. They're like, I don't particularly want to be here, but go on, I know, they get there. It's exactly the same. The place they're being dragged back to is exactly the same as it was pre-pandemic, except, and Dan, you might have a view on this, given you're the world of real estate, right? Except sometimes it's a bit smaller because they got rid of that floor because they suddenly decided, hey, we don't need that floor because there's about 30% of the people in anyway, So I'm sitting there thinking, you've got to adapt. You've got to adapt. You've got to look at what work people are doing. But that's always been true. But we've just, what we're doing is in danger of looking at it going, well, this is how it was, and is just a little less of it in the office now. That's about as sophisticated as some of the, I'm sure people are doing really good work, but that's as sophisticated as some of the arguments go. So to answer your question, Sophie, I don't think it's about doing, as part of this wider debate about FM to workplace, it's the same message it's always been, except the environmental context at which people are being asked to do that thing has changed. And we as professionals should be looking at that, understanding how it's going to impact what we do, and respond to it in the way that we would respond to any sort of environmental change. I just, at the moment, don't feel generally like that's happening.
Well, that's part of the reason for having this debate, to make sure that people understand what is living amongst people and the questions they should really be addressing. You mentioned some data from the people that you collect. Can you explore a little bit more about what else they're saying, other than that they're being dragged back to the office, and what some of the issues are for them?
Yeah, if I could sum it up in a kind of very simple, we're looking at the aggregated stuff. I think it's important for people to remember with anything like data benchmarks and stuff like that, your organization is different to everyone else. There'll be stuff you can learn, but there'll be also, you've got to do the hard work. There's no shortcuts on this. But generally speaking, the most common topic attached to hybrid is commuting. That's the thing. It's simply about the location. So people will talk about the commute has suddenly become a massive stressor, and almost looking at your point about Gartner and all this sort of stuff about, well, some of not Gartner, Gallup, about some of the data that's come out. I'm not surprised if people have been asked to do 2-hour commute a day. We just accepted it before as a thing, and now we go, yeah, that really sucked. And I don't want to do it again. So there's been a heightened awareness. So people talk about the commute a lot. And the number one thing actually when people get into spaces is meeting rooms. Because if we're saying to everyone, come in to collaborate, then everyone just books meeting rooms. And then you come in and you go, I can't get a meeting room. And the rest of the office isn't set up for collaboration. Because guess what? Back to a previous point, no one's changed the office layout, no one's thought about it. But equally, and this is another guest on the podcast, Dan Wakeling, we haven't published this one yet, it's coming out in a fortnight. He talked about how activities that look like concentration now are actually collaboration in the office, but again, we're not ready for that. So people doing Teams calls in the office looks like they're being isolated and concentrating, and actually they're collaborating. So there's a little bit of that we're doing things in a different way, but again, you're asking us to do it in the same space that we've always done it. And I think the final point is on that, when we see the data coming in, is generally when people speak about hybrid working or remote working or flexible working, whatever terminology they use, it's positive. And it's positive when they're thinking about it in the context of, it's great that I can do some work from home as well. It's probably not positive from the view of the employer, which is that there is still a very strong desire not to do all your work in these big, expensive, shiny corporate boxes.
Okay, thank you for that. I'd like to focus a little bit more on key drivers and enablers of productivity, because it should be quite obvious what the benefits are about unlocking these benefits through different drivers. Before we get to the drivers, can we just talk a little bit more about the benefits? And Rebecca and Hannah, I think I'm coming back to this side of the screen. Dan, I'm going to bring you in as well.
Going to let Hannah go first, but no one else can off mute then. So sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand. So you mean like what
are the different
drivers that help
to unlock through different drivers?
I suppose it's recruitment, isn't it? If you are a remote hybrid company, your employee base could be so much more spread. You're not just focused on anyone that can commute to the office. You know, you can employ so many different people from so many different backgrounds. You're then getting different experiences and perspectives into your company, and therefore that can only be a good thing that drives different types of ideas and collaboration. That's kind of one of the main things for me from a driver for remote working. I think it's different types of people you get rather than someone who lives next door, because you know you all live in the same area.
Thank you. So we've spoken a little bit about employee engagement, motivation, business processes, role of insights and analytics, constituent parts of productivity, and how do you measure that? Can we start exploring those different elements a little bit, please? How do you facilitate that employee engagement? What does good look like in this element? Hannah, go ahead.
Sophie and I talked about this, about employee engagement, and I take issue with the idea of employee engagement, because we have this idea and employee engagement as kind of coming with my academic head on as a concept is difficult, because we don't actually know what employee engagement is. And even the practice of employee engagement is this idea of the perfect worker, that they're going to be, you know, fully there, fully present all the time. And the idea that, you know, that's the expectation and that we want for everybody, and that is just not realistic. And this is an organizational need for employee engagement. I think it's more important, and this is kind of what the literature would be suggesting, and these are the things that we use, and more around motivation. What are our employees actually needing out of their work, and how can we support that and engage with that to meet our employees' needs? Because we can't expect everybody every single day to be the height of engagement. Engagement fluxes from day to day, from week to week, depending on the complexity of things that are going on for our employees. So the expectation that we're always meeting and needing this super engaged employee, I just don't think is practical. I'm kind of building on from what Chris was saying before, like previous question. If we're looking at what employees actually need from work, hybrid working, and this is based on some research that is currently in process of getting published, but research that we conducted during the pandemic, and things that people found about hybrid working and working from home was that they had more autonomy, they felt more autonomous, they felt like still related to others, because we were doing lots of things as organizations to kind of engage and connect our employees that we didn't particularly do before. But the things that they felt that they were lacking was incompetence. But this kind of came from feeling that they had to work more, that they felt there was the pressure of less productivity. And so we need to understand what our employees actually need out of work to enable them to work better for them, but also in terms of well-being, but also for the organisation as well.
I think it's understanding not one size fits all in that case as well, isn't it? Because, you know, not everyone wants to do trust falls and, you know, sit in circles. There's lots of different ways of engaging different people.
So, Sophie, I think one of the things that's worth just reflecting on all of this conversation is the biggest single thing that we've seen, I think, over the last several years, and COVID has exaggerated this, but we're seeing the power go from individual organizations where they can have a box, tell people to be in it and do what they're told to do. They stick there forever. We hear about jobs for lives, etc. All of that's completely changed. So it's now completely people focused, and every individual person has a completely different requirement. So a lot of people want to work remotely. A lot of people don't want to work remotely. Some people want to work remotely, but they just don't have the place at home. All sorts of different things. And so generalizing even by generations is a really broad brush and pretty blunt tool to do things. So the workplace of the future is going to be where an organization meets those individual types of people's needs. And I suspect what we're going to find when it settles itself out is that you could have two identical or apparently identical companies, so two law firms, for example, one of which is going to be completely remote, and it will have all the benefits that come with that in terms of lower costs of employers, lower cost of offices, people from around the world working together so you can get the best talent. And then you're going to have the other extreme where people be in the office all the time, where you lose all of those advantages, but then you get the extra collaboration, culture, people being there and training, that side of things. And then there'll be a whole range in between. So we'll find different companies that are competing have a very different approach to people, and workplace will then follow that. So what we're going to have to do moving forward is, as workplace professionals, is just be incredibly people focused and incredibly flexible. And to do that, we're going to have to measure some of the things. So it was mentioned earlier about presenteeism. That's going to be a mighty, mighty bad measure in the future. You just can't measure a business's performance by presenteeism, which, if we're honest, is pretty much what most people have done traditionally in big companies for a long time. I think Dan's touched onto a really, really important topic here, though, right? Because your question was, what are the drivers for it? What are the kind of the advantages, the benefits? Why should we be, really embracing this sort of stuff? Goes back to something I said as well about, the return to office strategy suggests that you've already got something in mind, right? We have talked about FM, and let's keep it as an FM kind of sphere. We have talked about FM being a people business for a long time, right? And Dan's right. This is the time to really live and breathe that. But the cynic in me thinks that when we are saying that, we are still thinking and looking through a property lens at people. So we're sort of going, yeah. I'm still responsible for the property. I just need to be a bit more people focused when I do that. And the co-host of my podcast, Ian Ellison, has a lovely way of saying this: is that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and therefore, at the moment, it kind of feels to me that people are looking at this new landscape and going, I'm responsible for the property. What's our response to this? As opposed to taking a huge step back that goes, how's everything changed? And how, what I think the opportunity is, the fluid thinking we can have now. We are not confined to how things were done before. So to give you an extreme example, Ben Weber, who's the El Presidente of Humanize, which is an American company, we were interviewing him the other day, and he said, and it's extreme, so I don't want to see loads of comments and hysteria on the chat, because this is an extreme example, I think, to illustrate a point. Scrap your property budget and just put it all into an events budget. Just say to your people, you're going to work remotely, but every fortnight we're going to have a massive barbecue over here, or we're going to bring everyone in here. Because to Hannah's point, there is a really important social ties that we need to build, because there will be tough times in organizations. And if everyone feels like an individual, they'll just turn their camera off, right? You've got to feel like you've got to build something with someone if you're going to support them and help them and carry them. It's extreme, but I thought it's just a wonderful way of thinking, well, hold on a minute. We've kind of always had building X. Why do we need building X? Why is it there? And quite often you find it's because someone very senior lived about 20 minutes away when they had to make a decision about the property. So, you really challenge and question everything that you've done, and think about it through the person. To Dan's point, we got to think about what they need, want, and all the variations of that are. Here's our response, and it might not be an office.
I think that's quite right, Chris. I think when we see the fears of the FMs coming to the fore, it's like, what on earth if our place of work disappears? Will there be something left for us? And we will get to the role of the FM for the future in a moment on that. Before we get to that, I kind of want to touch on some of the measurement, and it was something that both Dan and Hannah, well, I know Hannah will talk about this, but it's the whole measuring of productivity, including absenteeism, and how you would want to reduce that. Hannah, can you talk a little bit about ROE and kind of what that tells you about the areas where FM should really be prioritizing their area? And we've had questions coming in from the audience as well. You start, and I'll might bring in some questions in relation to that.
Okay, perfect. So for those of you who don't know, ROE was developed with my research team, Matt Tucker and Nigel Osland, to look at how we can transform some of those like intangible things that we talk about into more visible, tangible things to communicate to decision makers in organisations. So all the good things that we do as workplace and facilities managers, what is the actual benefits of those things? So historically, decisions have been made kind of on those transactional space kind of ideas, and we wanted to focus on, you know, the people, the activities that are done in the workplace. And so what ROE is, it's return on workplace investment. It looks at what are the performance benefits of making changes in the workplace. And so really it's that Google Translate of the things that we all know that produce, you know, benefits, and they do like impact on individuals, their experience and their performance. Well, translate that into, you know, those decision makers into a language that they can actually understand, that, you know, there is performance benefits from making these changes to the workplace.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. We've talked a lot about the office environment and obviously really putting people first, environment second. What about beyond the environment? How do you measure some of that?
Beyond the office environment?
Yes.
I think it's still about looking at what people need out of their environments, wherever that be. Like, we're still looking for, you know, yes, the ROE tool is focused on the office environment, but a lot of those things can be translated elsewhere. You know, by this, basically, the tool suggests that we should focus on the people and their experiences and making that better, because actually that does produce the performance output. And so I think that that idea can be applied anywhere. If we meet individuals in what they need in their space and their place, virtual, physical, and also social, then we will like support them in achieving better performance-wise, but also their experience in work will be better. And I think it's taking away that kind of traditional view of, you know, it's got to be that space, and, you know, reducing space will lead us to a better output. Well, actually, it's if we support our employees with what they do and their experience in work, that will actually produce an output for the business organisation. And, you know, we've put that in tangible terms that can be seen based on a massive data that we've translated into something more simple.
Thank you. I think, you know, talking about data and data analytics, can we talk a little bit more about what the role of data and data analytics actually is to achieve these outcomes? Rebecca, as an organisation, that's obviously something that you contribute to in driving forward productivity. Can you talk a little about that?
So, yeah, I mean, data is key to a lot of business decisions, isn't it? And I think when you're implementing any form of technology, you need to understand what data you want to get out of it. What do you want to see? So there's no point in saying that I want to you know, understand the temperatures of all my fridges if you're not willing to, you don't have the capability of monitoring the temperatures of those fridges. So, I mean, that's a key point to start off with. But I mean, it can drive best decisions for companies. You know, you can, if you've got a good CAPM system, you can then look at your asset management, and you can actually go, right, we're doing a standard 6 monthly PPM just on all escalators, for example, but actually some escalators might not get used that much, so you could reduce that to an annual PPM, whereas some escalators could get used, you know, considerably more than others, so therefore you need to increase that frequency in order to maintain it. And, you know, same with using asset lifecycle information. You know, if you spent £10,000 maintaining an escalator, I don't know why I'm obsessed with escalators today, but we are, you know, you spent £10,000 maintaining it, but actually to replace it is £12,000. You know, you could use technology and data to go put in thresholds and go, right, if we spent £8,000, we're not spending any more, we're just going to replace it. So it's about driving efficiencies, and it's about understanding what's going on everywhere. You know, it's the same with you know, we're talking about obviously return to work. If you've got a room booking system, so we've got EMS, for example, you can use the data from that to understand what type of desks or areas people are booking. And back to Chris's point from earlier, if you've got loads of people booking meeting rooms, but you don't have any meeting rooms, then you need to invest in the workspace to actually create some meeting rooms. There's no point in having 1,500 desks available if all anyone wants is a 4-person meeting room that you don't have. And it's helping drive those decisions which you can get.
Thank you. Quite a few issues still to unpack, but we're starting to run out of time. Before we really address many of the questions from the audience, I wanted to understand a little bit more what your thoughts were. And I think this is mostly addressed to Dan, because it's obvious, Rebecca, your outline of how technology plays a role is important. And how does the FM really respond to that? What is the role of the FM towards the future, and how can they manage that transition as well? Ron, I know that you feel quite passionate about what the role of FMs can be towards the future. Can you share your thoughts, your ideas about some of the risks in this?
Yeah. So trying to wrap together some of the things there. So if the workplace of the future is going to be much more focused on the human and serving the human, then we're going to need to measure things a lot more, which means much more data. And anything you want to, and pretty much to your earlier question, you can measure anything. So actually getting data and measuring basically anything is pretty easy. The key here is, why are you measuring it and what are you trying to do with it afterwards? And so you need to think about, for example, for an office or for a company, you need to look at productivity. And as been pointed out, that's not just productivity in the office itself, in the building, it's general productivity. So you need to measure that. The second thing you can measure is things that can be used as proxies or that indicates that. So to pick up on one of the questions that was there about air quality, clearly in COVID, air quality has gone up the agenda because of health and well-being. But the Green Building Council did a piece of research which said that productivity goes up 11% with high quality air, effectively fresh air going to people. And so you can also measure those drivers. So whilst that isn't a measure of productivity, we can see there's a direct link there. And so from a facilities management point of view, we need to understand why we're trying to measure things and what we want to know, and then try and drive both the outputs, the productivity, but that's really difficult to do. So we also need to measure the inputs. So for example, in that case, air quality. So from a property point of view, we need to measure all of that, and it will give us a perfect picture of what's going on. So the role of the facilities manager going forward is going to be understanding the human. Why are we asking those questions, and what do we need to measure? The problem with that is you can start arguing that within an office building, you should be using facial recognition to know how happy people are. You can give them Fitbits to know what they're doing, track them around the building. I think there's a question that came up earlier about keystroke. Yeah. That's all brilliant. And that logically helps us understand the productivity of someone. But on the flip side of that, it is also incredibly intrusive. And so the role of the facilities manager is going to be asking those original questions. What do we need to know and what are we trying to measure? But also making sure it's proportionate and it's the ethical thing to do. Because there's going to be huge amounts of data that we could collect, which is going to have very little benefit, although maybe some, which starts having a really, really big risk as well. So for me, the facilities manager of the future is going to go from managing a building as a building to managing a building and the people within it about how it performs with them. And clearly from a corporate point of view, that's going to be beyond a particular building and go into people's homes. It's going to go into people's workplaces or what they do on the train or the commute, all over the place. So it's going to be much more about how we align to those people and ask those human questions. So for me, the role of facilities manager going forward is going to be even more important than it is today. I think it's going to become even more crucial. It's going to be even more valuable, but with the caveat that it will need to evolve and embrace technology to be able to ask those really important human roles.
Thank you. And actually, almost as a quick round, I'd love to get the panel's thought about this particular question around tracking software on staff and laptops. What are your thoughts around that? Understanding the panel's views from both an employer and employee perspective.
Quickish answer is it's shaky ground. So you've got to be careful. generally speaking, it goes back to what Dan says about if you are capturing, and I guess Hannah would advocate this as a researcher as well. If you're collecting something, it's for a reason. Like, you're not just collecting and hoping that something emerges. You're collecting it because then you'll be able to specifically articulate why you're collecting that, because communication will be important to say to people, here's what it is. But ultimately, people will be okay with tracking data. My sense is people are okay with some form of tracking as long as they can see a benefit for it, as long as it doesn't go too far into their own personal sense of self. You know, if you're saying, look, we just like to know when you're in the building, when you're not, because that's going to help us, I know, customize an experience for people like you on the days that you're more likely to be here. You go, oh, okay, well, that's fine. If you're just doing it, then it looks like you're up to something shifty.
So, Sophie, can I just add on to that? Because I agree with that. Actually, the education and communication is the most important thing here. Because if you ask most people in an office whether they're being tracked and whether they're happy to, most will say they're not being tracked at the moment. The truth is, whether intentional or not, through the use of social media, where your phone is, door entry systems, facial recognition, cameras that are in the building, people are being tracked everywhere all the time anyway. So it's much better to be on the front foot and to be really clear and communicate it. And then, as Chris was saying, to make sure you can explain why you're collecting this data and what the benefit is, at which point most people will then have a sensible conversation about what's ethical, what's fair, which is always a subjective element.
Well, it goes back to purpose, explaining the why and ensuring that you have the buy-in from colleagues through communicating it properly. Did anyone else want to add any thoughts to that? Rebecca, Hannah? I wasn't too sure if people were coming off there.
I was only going to say more data, like just echoing really, more data isn't always good. It isn't good. Like, that's what I'm always telling students about. You can't just collect data for the sake of it, as Chris said, just to see if something pops up. There's got to be a reason. And as an academic researcher, we have to do ethics anytime we want to collect data. And part of the process is weighing out the costs of the research for everybody involved, the organisation, the individuals. You know, is the cost of collecting the data or the research going to outweigh the benefits? And if you're collecting more data just for the sake of it and doing lots of these things, you're probably going to tip the balance.
There's a lovely idea. Imagine organisations have to run an ethics statement for any data they collect.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
Well, 2 questions. The second one will come back to that. I just wanted to get your answer to a question from Phil Evans, really, because what the pandemic has done and it has enabled people to work remotely away from home. And that has had an impact sometimes on how people engage in the social setting. How do you really deal with that when people become uncomfortable in an office environment and the employer has a duty of care to help staff back into that office environment and culture of the business?
Is that question to me?
Oh, well, if you want to take
anyone,
go for it.
I'm just thinking, you know, about meeting. It's going to say, like, meeting with the individuals and seeing what they need. You know, it's some people are going to be slower on the uptake and wanting to return back. You know, I think we've seen that in every aspect of life. People have been slower and, you know, taking it at their own pace to feel comfortable in doing activities again. And, you know, some people are just happier sitting back. But it's about creating those connections and those opportunities for connections. You know, more relationships, more connections with individuals isn't better. It's about the quality of those relationships for individuals. That's what helps them feel better and reduces these ideas of like loneliness. So it's organizations creating opportunities for quality and connections, not just opportunities to bump into lots of people in the offices. And it's meeting individuals on, you know, their needs, like, you know, not forcing everybody into a room at once and expecting everybody to be able to, you know, develop those relationships and have conversations.
Thank you, Hannah. One question, and I can also see that Chris was engaging with it. Can you see more use of AI on FM and workplace management and how this will affect FM?
I hope so, as someone who uses AI in their product. But I started typing the answer and I thought, actually, it's really complicated. I think first off, we need to define AI, because people are sort of throwing it around, and actually what do we mean? Do we mean sort of industry scale machine learning computing that we can't get our head around? Are we thinking about things like ChatGPT because that's, you know, very of the now and very, very kind of visible? Generally speaking, though, I think this is true of any technology that comes in. It won't solve the problems that we've been talking about earlier on, right? If you are not thinking about people, if you're not thinking about their experience and how you approach that and all the rest of it, you can have as much AI as you want. So what AI generally powered tools are there for is to essentially support human thinking, right? To do the stuff that we can't do. So for as an example in property, I guess, you know, just think about all the different, Dan sort of touched on a few of them, right? All the different data points that are streaming in at every possible level at the moment. It's too much for us to think about, right? Things like AI and computing power can help with that. They can spot patterns that we can't spot and all the rest of it. If you look at it from what people talk about now a lot with AI tools, it's co-piloting, right? And that's a really nice idea, I think. So ChatGPT, there are people that are writing computer code that will say, look, there's so many mundane code scripts I need to write. I haven't got time to do them. I can just ask ChatGPT to do it whilst I think about this, and I'll come back and go, actually, that's useful. I'll take that. Yeah, thank you. It's like having a personal assistant, a really good personal assistant. So I think that's really where we'll get into, which will be asking tools to do stuff that we can't. And Microsoft are already playing around with ideas of lumping a load of data into a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and saying to Excel, what's interesting in here? You know, that's where I think it will start really, really, really becoming ubiquitous. But I think the signs at the moment is that there's still a fairly limited kind of take up for it.
Thank you, Chris. Before we go to our poll question, I just want to give Rebecca an opportunity to talk to the AI point, because as an organisation who obviously facilitates technology, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I think, you know, Chris is 100% correct, really. It is about using it for the right tools and for the right functionality. You know, too much data can just cause confusion, but it can also create great opportunities. You know, it can predict functionalities, it can predict trends. You can use it to kind of do a lot of things that we can't do, or that you can do by analysing a load of data that takes you 3 weeks, whereas, you know, AI can do it in 2 minutes. So I think from that point of view, AI has got a lot of potential. I think it's not where we need to be yet, you know, and, you know, we do trials with some of our products as well to try and, you know, use it for predictive functionality. You know, we want to know if an equipment's piece is going to break before it breaks, so the client can then get it fixed without having any downtime and, you know, having any consequences from that point of view. But yeah, the whole AI used to make fake people just freak me out element of it, I'm not going to lie.
Thank you, Rebecca. Now, I realise we've covered an awful lot on this call, and I also feel at the same time that we quite haven't done justice to extracting all the knowledge that each of the panel has got on this call. So we will be revisiting this area once again with Accruent. But before we close, we would really like to invite your thoughts and opinions on what aspects of productivity offers the most opportunity for your organization now, so we can focus on particular elements in the next webinars. Lucy, can we show the poll, please? So what aspects of productivity offers the most opportunity for our organization now? Employee engagement, motivation and productivity, business process and governance structures, role of insights and analytics, constituent parts of measuring productivity through FM lens, and optimizing all workspaces, including ensuring the right office footprint. What would you like to see of more being discussed next time? And once we have finalized that poll, right, then that leaves me to, employee engagement, motivation and productivity. What that says to me is that people want to know an awful lot about culture and how to get that right. and then making sure that that translates in creating the right spaces, including understanding really how they need to right size their office space as a space for collaboration. Right, that is brilliant. We will look at that a little bit more, but that really leaves me to thank Rebecca, Dan, Chris and Hannah for your time and fabulous insights, and really as well to Accruent for sponsoring this webinar. A recording will be available for anyone who wants to listen and share with a friend. It will be available both on our YouTube channel, and it will be available from our website usually a few days after this. For those non-members, please do get in touch if you want to find out more. Thank you again for joining us, and for so many to stick with us for time management. And thank you, and see you next time. Bye.